There's a story your parents have told for years about the time at your 5th birthday, in the middle of the cake, in the middle of the singing, you wandered off to play by yourself in the corner. The story always got laughs. They never quite noticed that the version of you in that corner had already started learning something, that sometimes it was easier to leave the room than to wait for someone in it to look at you. If you grew up in a house where you were technically present but emotionally unaccounted for, where your siblings had crises that pulled the room toward them, where your accomplishments got noted in passing while everyone moved on to something else, where you became the easy one because being easy was the only way to not be a burden, your psychology is shaped in a very specific way. And it's not the way you've been told. The people who grew up feeling invisible developed something most people never have to. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Most kids learn who they are by being reflected back. A parent looks at them and says, "You're so funny." A teacher says, "You're really kind." A grandparent says, "You remind me of your mother." Slowly, these reflections accumulate, and the child builds a sense of self out of what was mirrored back. Psychologists call this mirroring, and it's one of the most basic developmental needs a child has. But some kids don't get reliable mirroring. Maybe a sibling had bigger needs. Maybe a parent was dealing with their own depression, addiction, illness, or divorce. Maybe the household was loud and you were quiet. Maybe everyone was performing and nobody was looking. Whatever the reason, the mirror was either turned away or showed you a blurred version of yourself. And without that steady reflection, a kid does what kids always do when their environment doesn't meet a basic need. They adapt. They go inward. They start building a self out of materials nobody handed them. In the 1960s, British paediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott introduced one of the most influential ideas in modern psychology. He described what he called the true self and the false self. Winnicott argued that when a child's authentic feelings and reactions are reliably noticed by caregivers, the child develops a true self, a stable inner identity. But when a child's environment is unresponsive, when feelings get overlooked or minimized, the child quietly builds a false self instead, a version of themselves that's easier to be around, less demanding, more invisible. The true self goes underground. It doesn't disappear. It just hides until it's safe. Psychologist Lindsay Gibson built on this in her 2015 work on adult children of emotionally immature parents. Her research found that kids raised in environments where their emotional reality wasn't acknowledged often grew into adults who couldn't quite locate themselves, successful, capable, often deeply liked, but unsure who they actually are when no one is watching. Picture this. It's a regular Wednesday evening. Your sister is having a meltdown about something at school, and your parents are at the kitchen table dealing with it, leaning in, asking the right questions, working through it with her the way good parents do. You're sitting on the stairs in the hallway, holding a piece of paper. You got an A on something hard. You came down to show them. You watched the meltdown unfold for about a minute. And then, very quietly, you turned around and went back to your room. You put the paper in a drawer. Nobody noticed you came down. Nobody noticed you went back up. You did not feel angry about it. You felt, for the first time, the small, specific click of becoming someone who doesn't ask. But here's where it gets interesting. That kid on the stairs, the one who turned around, was developing something most kids never get the chance to develop. When you're not the center of attention, you spend an enormous amount of time watching. You watch your parents argue and reconcile. You watch your siblings get praised and corrected. You watch how adults actually treat each other when nobody's performing. By the time you're an adult, you've spent thousands of hours studying human behavior up close without anyone realizing you were studying. But there's more going on than just observation. People who felt invisible growing up tend to develop unusually accurate pattern recognition for human behavior. You can walk into a room and clock the dynamics in 30 seconds. Who is in charge? Who is annoyed? Who is performing? Who is actually paying attention? This isn't a parlor trick. It's a skill you trained for years, often without knowing it, because reading the room was the only way to navigate a household where the room wasn't reliably reading you. And here's the kicker. The hours you spent in your own head as a kid, the ones that felt lonely at the time, were quietly building one of the richest inner worlds an adult can have. Kids who spent significant time alone often develop more elaborate internal landscapes, more vivid daydreams, more layered private narratives. As adults, this often shows up as creativity, strong intuition, or simply the ability to entertain yourself with your own mind for hours, which most adults can no longer do. And this shows up in ways you might not even notice. Kids who couldn't reliably get their needs met by adults learn to meet their own needs early. You probably figured out how to soothe yourself by 8, how to entertain yourself by 6, how to feed yourself when nobody else was making dinner. As an adult, you are almost unnervingly capable. You don't ask for help. You don't expect to be rescued. You handle things. The cost of this is real, and we'll get to it. But the competence is also real, and it is genuinely rare. There's also something developmental psychologists have noticed that most people miss. Kids who felt invisible often grew into adults with an unusual quality of attention. When you give someone your time, they actually feel it. You ask the second question, the one that goes deeper. You notice when someone else in a group is being overlooked the way you once were. You make people feel seen because you know exactly what it costs to not be seen. Now let's be honest, the cost is real. Adults who grew up invisible often struggle to ask for help when they actually need it. They downplay their own pain. They quietly assume their feelings are less important than the feelings of the people around them. They can be in a room full of friends and still feel slightly outside of it, the way they did at 8 years old. Self-sufficiency is a skill. It is also sometimes a wall. But for the adults who learn to bring some of the invisible kid back into view, here's what you actually carry. You have a depth of perception that almost nobody else in your friend group has. You know how people work. You know how rooms work. You know how to be alone without being lonely, which is a skill the rest of the world is trying desperately to relearn. You have an inner life that didn't depend on anyone else's permission to develop. And you have an empathy that's not theoretical, the kind that comes from having been the kid on the stairs who turned around. The work isn't to undo the invisibility. The work is to stop treating its gifts like accidents. The observation, the inner world, the self-reliance, the empathy. None of these are coincidences. They are what your nervous system built when nobody was looking. There's something quietly remarkable about the kids who grew up invisible. Most of them never quite forget how it felt. They can be in a meeting, in a marriage, in a room full of people who love them, and still catch the small ghost of the 8-year-old who put the paper back in the drawer. That ghost doesn't go away, but it doesn't have to. It's the part of you that learned to pay attention to people who are being overlooked, including yourself. It's the part that became the friend who actually listens, the partner who actually notices. If your childhood made you feel like you didn't quite take up space, this might be the moment to consider that you were never small. You were just developing in private, and what you built in that privacy is more than most people ever get the chance to build. You're not invisible now. You were never actually invisible then. You were just developing somewhere quieter than the rest of the room could see. And what grew there was bigger than anyone realized. If you find yourself recognizing pieces of your own psychology in these videos, that's the entire point of silent awareness. Subscribing is the quietest way to support what we're doing here, and it genuinely helps the channel keep growing. Hit the button if you want the next one to find you.